Good evening, Salem. How you guys doing? I am so excited to be with you tonight for another Faith in Crisis. You haven't seen me in a while. We have not done Faith in Crisis in a while, but I thought it real important that we come together tonight, especially centered around what's happening with Chicago's public schools. And so sit back. You might want to text somebody. You might want to hit share and let somebody know that we are talking to about public schools tonight. If you are a school teacher and a Salem school teacher, you may want to ask a question. Or if you're not a Salem school teacher, if you're a parent, you may want to ask a question. And so we'll be looking at Facebook to see what questions are being asked of us tonight. I have a very special guest that I'll introduce after prayer. And then he and I are going to just have a tremendous conversation about Chicago public schools. Let's start with a word of prayer, as we always do. Our Father and our God, we thank you so much for your love and kindness and your great mercy. Thank you for giving us the privilege to come and share with the Salem family and those who are watching us another Faith in Crisis. Thank you for how you use Faith in Crisis to literally get us through a pandemic. We thank you tonight for our normal Bible class that we have in this spot. And we pray, God, that we would use this time wisely to honor you, to glorify your name, to get out information and inspiration across the Chicagoland area and, yea, even across the whole world. Bless our special guest tonight and keep us in your care. In Jesus' name, amen. Salem, tonight I have a very special guest. His name is Troy LaRaviere. Troy LaRaviere. Troy is the head of the Principals Union for the Chicago Public Schools. That's right. There is a Principals Union, and Troy is the head of that union. He is our special guest tonight. He's going to help us understand what has been happening with CPS and the strike, and tomorrow kids are slated to go back to school, but Troy is going to help us understand all of that. So let me welcome him, Troy. Thanks so much for being here, brother.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to finally be face to face. I hear your voice so much on my mother-in-law's TV when I'm in the kitchen cooking breakfast. I hear you in the next room, so it's good being here with you in person.
I'm excited to be here. How long have you been the president of the Principals Union?
This is my 5th year.
5th year?
Yes.
All right. And are you a product of CPS yourself?
Yes, I am. I started off in Carter, Altgeld, Mollison, Sherman, and I eventually was in high school at Dunbar. I was a mighty man at Dunbar Vocational High School.
Wow. Have you run across any principal that you've had when you were in school, and are they able to see now that you are the president of the Principals Union?
I wish. There are a few that I wish could see me, but no, I have not run across any. I think the principal at Mollison, I was sent to her office several times and suspended maybe 8 times back in 1982, 83. I would love for her to see what I ended up as. And there's quite a few teachers, too. Miss Mitchell, Miss Brown in high school, Miss Mims, Miss McCoy. But no, I have not run into them since I took this position.
Teachers, I want you to hear that. I want you to hear several things. First of all, I want you to hear the names of the teachers that he just called out. They had no idea who they were shaping, what kind of young man they were shaping, getting ready, and he has become the head of the Principals Union. Teachers, your work is not in vain. There are students in your class that God is positioning them, destining them to become something. So don't give up. Don't hit your head against the wall. Troy, I was the chairman of the State Board of Education for 4 years, and I often looked for some of my teachers just so that I could tell them thank you, and then just so I could find out from others, are you still teaching? Because I might be able to do something about getting you to the principal's office like you sent me all those years. But it is such a good thing that you've turned out to be the head of the union. How did you become the head of the Principals Union?
I was principal at, I was an assistant principal at Johnson School. And there we had a great deal of success. We tripled the number of kids meeting math standards. We doubled the number of kids meeting reading standards. And so from that sort of launched me into a search for a principal's job. I became principal at Blaine Elementary School. And at Blaine, we had even more success. We increased the number of kids meeting reading standards from 25%, of black kids meeting reading standards from 25% to 75% at Blaine, and increased the overall number from 79% to almost 90%. And so I was the most awarded principal in the city for the duration of my time there. We rose to become the #1 ranked neighborhood school in the city. But as we were doing that, there were so many policies coming out of City Hall that were taking away our ability to continue what we were doing, and this was under the previous mayor. So I began to speak out. I listened to my colleagues say things behind the scenes, but not feel comfortable and be afraid of saying things in public. And eventually I began to just step out and say what everyone else was saying but was afraid to say in relationship to many of the policies that CPS was practicing, the school closings, the budget cuts, the special education cuts. I was the only principal to speak out against what Barbara Byrd Bennett did before she got investigated, for example. And so I made a name for myself amongst my colleagues, and eventually there was a push for me to run for the presidency of the Principals Association when the past president decided she was going to retire. And I ran, and I got 70% of the vote.
Wow. Well, speaking out, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
And technically, we're not a union, and Illinois principals don't have collective bargaining rights. And so we are affiliated with the national union, the American Federation of School Administrators, and we would like to have collective bargaining rights someday. And that's a state issue, a state law issue. Principals in New York have collective bargaining rights, California, Maryland. In fact, the 5 states that are on top of the U.S. News World Report's best education states all give collective bargaining rights to school administrators. And so it enables principals to have a voice in education policy that we don't have here in Illinois. But right now we don't have that voice, which is why when you, in that last back and forth between CPS and CTU, all you heard from, you didn't hear the principal's voice. You heard the teacher's voice, you heard the teacher's voice, but the principal's voice was absent for that conversation. We need to get it out there.
Well, I was chairman of the State Board of Education for, I think, 6 years. You guys never came, or no principal at that time ever came and said they wanted a principals union. That's the way to get that done, is at the state level. So we'll talk about that. Maybe we'll deal with that offline. How many public school students are there in the city of Chicago?
Last count was 360,000, if I'm correct. You can get the exact number from the CPS website, but my memory was 360,000.
And how many principals do you have?
We have 1,100 principals and assistant principals altogether. 850 of them are members of our association, and about a little less than half of them are principals, so a little bit over 500.
What is the ethnic breakdown in CPS, if you got it? Black, white?
For principals or students?
No, for students. I'm sorry. I should have made that plain.
My understanding is that the black Latino split is about even. I can't remember the exact percentage. It might be 40% apiece, and then the rest are white and Asian and make up a minority. But the bulk of the students in CPS are black and Latino.
So black are 40% and Latino are 40%.
Those are estimates.
Yeah, I know it's an estimate, but I went to public school. That's 80 right there. And so it's about 20% white and other.
Right.
All right, fantastic. So when we recently had these negotiations between the teachers union and CPS, where are the principals when that negotiation? Are you guys left out? I heard you saying that. I think I heard you say it. I want to make it clear. Are you all a part of the negotiations when the teachers negotiate with CPS?
No, we are locked out by the mayor's office and by CPS.
All right. So when, I want you all to pay attention to what he just said. When the teachers negotiate, they negotiate directly with Chicago Public Schools. Chicago Public Schools We don't have a independent school board. So here in Chicago, we're directly under the mayor. I think that happened around 1997, if I'm not mistaken, and we're directly under the mayor. But you're saying to me that no principal is a part of that negotiation that
There's
just happened?
no principals are part of the negotiations between teachers and CPS. Now, CPS often says it will consult its group that it creates. I spoke to members of that group, and they haven't been consulted at all on this. But even if it did, those are not the elected representatives. You know, and I talked to Mayor Lightfoot about this, and I asked her if I could record the conversation when we talked, right? But it was the day before she was elected, and I told her that the past mayor, like everything you do as a mayor in education policy, eventually a principal has to implement it. So you need principals at the table, and you need their elected representatives at the table. And I told her the past mayor and the CEO had been excluding the Principals Association, so we had to basically apply pressure techniques just to be heard and for them to change things. And I said, I would like a more cordial relationships where we are actually at the table. You'll get better education policy, because when you create this policy, who are you going to give it to make it happen in a school? You're going to give it to us. So you need us at the table to help you find holes in these policies that only principals can see. She assured me on tape that that would change. I remember her saying, absolutely, and she made the phrase, full stop. Full stop. There'll be full stop to that past practice. And we will definitely have the elected representatives of principals at the table during when they're setting policies. And she has not done that, and her appointees at CPS have not followed through on that one iota. Like, we have been completely blocked out.
All right, so an agreement was reached this weekend, and I'll get into that in a minute. Well, I'll ask you to get into that in a minute. But the agreement that was reached, kids go back to school tomorrow. Who is it in a school building? Now, let me make this clear, because I got friends on every side. I'm friends with the mayor. I'm friends with Janice at CPS. I'm friends with Troy now, my new friend. We have principals in our church. We have teachers in our church. I'm having a conversation. I don't want anybody to go away from here saying Reverend Meeks is on the side of. I don't even think that I know enough to know whose side to be on. So we're having a conversation, and Troy is presenting the principal side of it. At any point, any week, if the teachers want to come on and present their side, or CPS, this platform is available. That's who we are, and that's what we do here at Salem. But the agreement that was reached, who then must carry out that agreement?
Principals. The principals and assistant principals of Chicago Public Schools have to take that agreement and see if they can make it happen. And the problem is, we've already been looking at paying attention to the negotiations and trying to give the district a sense of whether or not what they're trying to do is possible. CPS released a plan back in November and gave it to principals, and we've had our members like, you know, I have to make sure I represent the voices of principals, or otherwise I won't be re-elected, right? It is in my best interest to always represent their voices. And so I'm always doing surveys of principals. I'm always having small groups of principals talk about whether or not this particular thing is going to work, so that I can give the district feedback from them. With that said, 80% of our members said that they do not have the staffing to make this agreement work. 80% said they do not have the staffing to make this agreement work. We did a survey back in the beginning of January 4th. That's when the number was at, it was 22% felt like they had the staffing and the rest did not. We redid the survey less than a week ago, and then that number is still at 75%. So it was at 80, now it's at 75. 75% today do not believe they have the staffing to make that agreement, to make reopening work. And we've been telling the district this for months, and the mayor keeps, I don't know why, but the mayor and the CEO keep repeating the same talking points as if schools are well-staffed and schools are going to reopen and they will have the staffing to reopen. What our members tell us is that it's impossible. And another thing, before I say another word, I want to make something really clear to folks. Unlike teachers, principals have never left schools. Folks have to understand, because people have these ideas and they've been taught these talking points to kind of negate what someone's saying if they're saying something that's against what they already believe. I want schools to reopen. If anybody's saying anything about them not being ready, I have these things in my mind that have been planted. Oh, you guys just don't want to go back to school. Well, principal, you can't say that about us. We have been in schools since March. We are there as a presence to ensure food gets distributed to needy families. Since March, we have never left. We have been there to distribute technology. When those computers got sent to kids, there weren't teachers there. The teachers didn't have to come and do that. We had to do that, and it was at a time when there was no mask mandate. So our members were out there. Some who have these high schools were distributing computers to thousands of people face to face at a time when there was no mask mandate, and many of them got COVID, right? Got sick, had to leave, and then came back after they got well and are still in their school. So I need your audience to understand that these are people who were in school before COVID, during COVID, and no matter what happens with this plan, they're going to remain in schools. And these folks who are charged with implementing this plan are saying it's not possible. Wow. In most of our schools.
Now, Salem, you heard it here first. First of all, you heard that principals never left schools, so that when COVID started, principals have always staffed buildings. So principals have never gone on strike, they've never left. And then the next thing you heard, and I was shocked to hear this, but Troy said, who is the president of the union, so to speak, of principals, that 75% of principals don't think the schools or don't have the staff to carry out the mandates that was just handed down to them. And so are you saying that principals then think, 75% of principals think that it's unsafe to open schools right now?
I know that 75% said they don't have the staffing. Now, how much of that 75% would say it's unsafe? I haven't polled them on that specific question, but I would imagine it's a huge amount because the staffing determines your ability to implement the safety protocols. I want to read directly some quotes from principals because I like to represent their voices.
All right, while he's pulling those up, we do have some principals that have joined us by Zoom. I'm not going to ask them to say anything. I know you're here. We're glad to have you here. Troy knows you're here. He could see the screen. And if he wants to call on either one of you all, he will. So I just wanted you to know that we recognize that you're here. I wanted our audience to know that we have principals who are joining us by way of Zoom. So what are the principals saying?
So I asked the question, do you have enough staff? And these are some comments that were in response. Not even close. CPS keeps granting additional ADA accommodation requests with no additional personnel to manage all the empty classrooms they're creating. So when they grant an ADA accommodation, that means a teacher gets to work from home. But their students are going to show up to that classroom, and that teacher's going to be working from home. So you're going to have a situation where kids who are learning remotely now at home will show up in the school, and they'll be in a school learning remotely from their teacher who's at home. And CPS is not messaging this, is not being honest with parents about the reality of the fact that many of the students who are coming back to the classroom will be sitting in the classroom and then learning from a teacher who is at home on a screen. So what is all the messaging about kids needing to come back to in-person learning when they'll be in the school in person, but their teacher won't be?
Wait. Let me ask you this now, because you are sharing some things with me that I not even thought of. There are instances where the teacher is going to be at home, but the students are going to be in the classroom. So there will be no teacher in the classroom. Do you have an idea of what percentage of teachers have elected to teach from home or will be allowed to teach from home?
The district has not released those numbers yet, but I can tell from many of the responses of our members that sometimes up from 20%.
You have to put your mic in the mic. Yeah.
Sorry, from anywhere from what our members are saying, sometimes they say 20% of their staff has been given an ADA accommodation. There's one who said up to 80% of her staff has been given ADA accommodation. So that's the range that I've heard so far.
Who's the adult in the room? When the children are in the room and the teacher is at home on Zoom, who's the adult in the room?
And that's the other staffing problem. And so when the teacher is not in the room, CPS has created these miscellaneous employee positions where they pay someone minimum wage, and they will open the position in the principal's budget, and then it's up to you to go look for someone. And so
You as a principal must find someone, Jane Doe, Jack Doe, anybody, to staff a room because the teacher won't be there. The teacher will be teaching remotely, but
right.
students will be there.
That is the insanity of this plan. And the bigger problem is that, number one, the qualification is a high school diploma. That's the qualification. So you're moving from, and I have so many other things to talk about with this plan, but you're moving from a situation where you're at home in front of a computer to where you're in school in front of a computer, watching a teacher, and then there's someone with a high school diploma who has no training in not only do they not have training in the teaching profession, they don't even have a college degree, but somehow they're supposed to facilitate the learning and the gaps that exist between, that are created from the fact that the teacher on the screen is going to be mostly focusing on the kids who are at home doing remote learning. And you who are at school are going to have to also be a remote learner, but in school. The second problem is that they found out there's a bandwidth issue in CPS. They don't have enough bandwidth for a classroom full of kids, or even sometimes up to 5 kids to do remote learning inside a school in a classroom. So these kids are going to be in a school doing remote learning, having bandwidth issues that they probably did not have when they were at home, may or may not have. And so, but again, the issue is also that people don't want to take these positions. Principals are having an extremely hard time. One, it's minimum wage. Two, it's a 4-month position. And 3, it's in a school where people are not necessarily, the people don't necessarily feel comfortable that the precautions that are necessary are being taken by the district because there's so much distrust in this district. And so when you have the fact that it's minimum wage, when you have the fact that it's a 4-month position, when you have the fact that people are hesitant to go back in schools with students because they're afraid of catching COVID, principals can't even staff those positions.
Let me ask you this question, and I'm ready for you to go back to your principal's questions. The people who are watching, if they wanted to help or to be a part of a solution, I know that our church is very active in trying to be a part of a solution. How could regular people be a help to CPS students?
I think regular people have to put pressure on the mayor's office. Like, you sold us a bill of goods. That's not exactly, you sold us a picture of in-person learning. That is not what's going on in schools. Principals have been trying to tell you for months that it's not going to work, and yet you keep pushing forward. So there are a couple of things, one of the things that's a problem is that they're mandating that a teacher teach remote students and in-person students at the same time. If you want a real in-person learning experience, you're going to have to dedicate a teacher solely to the ones who are there in person. Otherwise, you're just bringing kids there in person to do the exact same thing that they were doing remotely, and that's not what you sold to us. So I think, there's a verse in Luke. I'm not a big religious person, but I've looked at the book once or twice, and there's a verse in Luke where...
Well, I want to help you with that, but go ahead.
There's a verse in Luke where Jesus is talking to a group of folk. He's preaching, he's teaching, and it says, the chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to put Jesus to death, for they were afraid of the people. Mm-hmm. Now, they weren't afraid of Jesus. They were afraid of the people. They were afraid of the impact that this man would have on the people and any government, any group of leaders, any group of, that's who they care about. Mm-hmm. It's the people, and it's when the people, look at what's happening with Republicans in the Trump base. They're scared to tell the truth about him because of the mass of people that are behind him, right? And so we have to have a mass of people. The people are the ones that the mayor is going to respect when the people rise up. And I don't mean rise up like those folks, but when the people come up and demand that she be honest, she be transparent, that she bring principals, teachers, and parents into the bargain, into the negotiating room to create a plan that will actually work. And so I think that folks need to reach out to the mayor's office en masse and demand that kind of transparency, demand honesty, and demands that she bring the folks who have to implement the plan to the table in order to create one that would work.
So here's a question. Everyone doesn't want the vaccination. If a teacher or a student doesn't want to take the vaccination, can they still come back to school?
That's a CPS policy decision.
You have to use your mic.
Oh, yeah, sorry. That's a CPS policy decision. And I don't know what they've decided on that. I don't know if any of our guests have a yes or no answer on that. If anybody wants to raise your hand.
The question was, and I'll ask it again for our principals, if a teacher or a student doesn't want to take the vaccination, can they still come back to school?
Yeah, it looks like there has been no distinct policy from CPS, and so the answer to that would seem to be yes until CPS comes out and says no.
Here's another one. Pastor, is it mandatory for parents to send their children back to school with COVID pandemic still surfacing if they don't feel safe? So if a parent, if they don't feel safe, do they have to send their children back to school? I think I heard you make the case already, but say it again.
They do not. What CPS did was they put out a survey, and they had people indicate their preference. And so if you completed that survey, you said, I want in person, then you are eligible to come in person. Even if you said you want in person, you can still change your mind and not come back.
How is virtual learning working? You've been in the building. Your principals have been in the building since March. You guys have had a chance to see teachers teaching students virtually. How is that working?
It's working for some and not for others. I have principals who working in poor communities who regularly go out to students' homes to reconnect them to the internet so that they can stay engaged. And of course, these principals are in communities that are lower income, or that are more neglected. And so in communities where access to the internet is an issue, where the parents' lack of expertise and sort of competence in these technological devices is not there, it can become a problem. It's also an issue in relationship to being able to sort of sustain or get a gauge on student attention. That's an issue. However, the solution that's being proposed now does not solve any of those, because for the most part, you're bringing kids back to an in-person learning environment with a teacher who's either not in the room or who is also has to teach students who are at home. So even for the teachers who do show up, who are in person, what they then have to do is divide their time between the students who are in the room and the students who they're still teaching remotely, because CPS has mandated that they do both at the same time. When you have to do that, you have to tailor your instruction for one group or the other. And the group that you have to tailor your instruction for the most part, will be the students who are at home. So even when students are in the school with a teacher, much of their learning experience is going to still be tailored and structured like a remote learning experience, because that teacher has maybe 2 or 3 kids in the classroom, but they have 20 kids at home doing remote learning. Mm-hmm. And so the current structure does not solve remote learning problems. And one of the things that many of our principals have said is that we need to be spending more time on getting remote learning right and making it better than trying to force an in-person strategy that is even less optimal than the remote strategy. Let me give you another example that principals are telling me about. In middle school, where they're being understaffed, what they're having to do now is take kids who have, a social studies teacher, a math teacher, a science teacher, and a reading teacher, and have one teacher do them all, this remote learning. And so right now, my son gets taught math by someone who's an expert in math, a math teacher. He gets taught social studies by someone who is expert in that. He gets taught science by a science teacher. And he gets taught reading by a reading teacher. If we send him in person and his school's understaffed, he may end up getting taught math by a social studies teacher, and science by his social studies teacher, and reading by his social studies teacher. And so you've created a situation where they're in person, but the learning experience is so has been taken away from, and is not as high quality as the one he would have had in a remote environment because of the experience level of the teachers who are doing the subject.
All right, so you know the problem. We have a pandemic that nobody knows where it comes from. I guess it's Wuhan, China. But we're here now, and you know that there is a press to get kids back in school. Kids have been out of school for a year now. What would be your plan?
So
What because you know CPS is facing this problem of trying to figure out what to do, and teachers are trying to figure out what to do. As a principal, what would be your plan?
I'm glad you asked. We actually gave CPS a plan. It's called the RITE Plan, RITE, returning to an in-person teaching environment. And so when we looked at our membership and we saw that about 20 to 25% are ready to reopen, we didn't want to take a position against reopening because we got 25% of our members who are well-staffed enough to reopen. And so what we did was we created a phased-in approach where we said, let's pick 50 to 100 schools and start a pilot with the ones who are ready and focus the district's staffing resources on those schools and also on getting another group of schools up and ready to join the pilot. And it solves so many problems. If you've only got 20% who are well-staffed enough, well, let's focus on getting those 20% up and running. If you can't give vaccinations to all the teachers, well, you can focus getting these vaccinations to the teachers in the pilot group, and then that'll help solve your staffing problem, because if you say the folks in the pilot are going to get the vaccine, then you're going to get a lot more people who want to be a part of the pilot. Another issue is that no one's done this. You're trying to put 400, 500 schools online to all do this. The expertise is not there. You start with a pilot. You begin to develop a group of people who develop that expertise from experience and then can help those who come in when the pilot expands. And it's a lot more involved than that, but that's the basics of the pilot. Number one, 50 to 100 schools in person, focus the resources on getting it right in those schools. That's part two. And part three, expand it if it's successful. That was our plan, but it got ignored.
And so your plan is to keep building on that 100 until such time that all schools are ready to open. Let me ask you about the vaccine. If the vaccine is available and they have teachers who are supposed to take the vaccine, is it a mandate? Do you know that teachers must take the vaccine?
There's no mandate yet.
All right. Are there teachers, how many, and I'm just asking you to guess, I don't know, I'm just asking you to guess, about how many teachers are there in the system?
25 to 30,000, I would guess.
25 or 30,000. So in order to vaccinate them all, we would need about 25 or 30,000 vaccines. Right. One thing I did tell the mayor when we were having a discussion last by text, that I would do everything I could to help find 10,000 vaccines. This was just Sunday, and I haven't found my 10,000 yet. But will the teachers be ready to take the vaccines once they are found?
This is another thing I've discovered from my consistent communication with our members, and it is in line with what we generally know about different populations.
Hold on a minute. I need somebody with 10,000 vaccines who are willing to donate those vaccines specifically to teachers. If you have them, I do have it's not a promise. I just told the mayor that I was going to try to find them. So my word is out there. If you do have 10,000 vaccines that teachers can take here in the city of Chicago, could you please call me, hit a brother up, let me know, get in touch with me, and so that my word could be good. Thanks so much. But are the teachers ready to take them?
So the answer to that question is in line with what we generally know about what different populations' attitudes are. And so I've talked with principals. I've talked with a principal who's basically said, all my white teachers want to take it, and very few of my black teachers want to take it.
You know, black people I'm black. I've been black all my life. I love being black. I was black. I've been black 3 times. I was a black baby. I was a black teenager, and now I'm a black man. If it's a such thing as reincarnation, I come back again. That's who I want to come back as a black person. So I love being black. Black people still think that every vaccination is a Tuskegee, and that they're trying to somehow vaccinate black people with something that don't work. I'm not afraid personally of the virus. My wife and I, vaccination. My wife and I took it, and we've had both shots, and we are encouraging everybody. That's why we took the shots, and we took them early so that we could film it to say that if we're going to get out of this pandemic, something is going to have to work. But let me just ask you, just off the cuff, since we own it, why do you think, and you might have a better reason, why do you think black people are afraid to take this virus, a vaccination?
I think the core issue of that is the same core issue that's behind why folk resisted reopening so much. Folks resisted reopening because they had trust issues with the district, deep trust issues that were seeded and fueled by the district's actual behavior, both in the present and in the past.
But see, yours is the district answer. Black people across the board who don't have anything to do with schools are afraid of this.
Let me get to my
right.
second part. So I said, so the root of the distrust, the root of folks' resistance to the district is rooted in distrust. I think the root of black folks in particular, distrust in medicine, is because of a long history of abuse, manipulation, and our treatment by the medical establishment. I don't think that I'm certainly going to take it myself, and I think everyone should take it. But given the history of this country, its treatment toward black people, black people's experience with doctors right now, you look at studies of how doctors treat white folk and how doctors treat black people, independent, verifiable, repeated studies, we're treated differently. We're not prescribed things that a white person would be described. Our pain is not taken as seriously as a white person's pain is taken.
Right.
Like, we are treated differently. It is an undeniable research-based fact that the medical establishment treats us differently, and differently meaning worse than it treats other people. And I think that collective experience that we have creates that, much of that distrust. And then, of course, a lot of it is rumor and innuendo,
Right.
false rumors and innuendos about but I think one of the reasons we're more likely to believe those false rumors and innuendos are as a result of our negative experiences with the medical establishment. So that's my response.
Do you know that only 5% of African Americans in the United States have been vaccinated? And one of the reasons is that as soon as I've talked to several medical clinics in the last week, as soon as the information goes out online, it is white people who, and I'm not faulting you, white people, get your shots. White people are filling up all of the slots in black communities. And what these medical professionals are telling me is that when they open their doors thinking that they're getting ready to shoot a vaccine, a lot of black people, it is all white people who've come from Waukegan, Hoffman Estates, Inverness, and they're coming in the city and taking these shots. And black people are not, in some cases, they're not trying to get vaccinated. And in other cases, when we do try, all the spots are gone and they filled up with white people. But anyway, don't have nothing to do with education. I do think that, guys, those of us who are African American, we need to strongly pray and have conversations with people about this vaccination, because I just don't think white people would be lining up to take something that's unsafe. I just don't think they would be doing it. They're coming into black neighborhoods to take this vaccination. If they were not safe, I don't think they would be taking them.
Mm-hmm. I think there has to be some significant outreach to black communities using
That's
people
what we're
who are
doing
trusted.
right now. Yeah.
Right.
That's what I'm doing right now, trying to significantly reach out to black people. But again, let's see, my staff just contacted me and told me the person with the 10,000 staff, 10,000 vaccines, you can email info@sbcoc.org. That's info@sbcoc.org, because I felt that if, Troy, if vaccinations were holding up teachers from going into classrooms, then all of us should try to do our level best in getting teachers vaccinated so they can get back into the classroom. If indeed vaccination was the one thing that was holding teachers up.
It's certainly one of the things, and it will certainly take part of the excuse for not returning off the table.
Right.
Right? We've given you the vaccine, and so it's not going to be a perfect fix, but a lot more people will be willing to come and would have much less of a reason to want to sort of resist coming back and returning to the classroom.
Well, there are many of you who are watching us tonight. You work in health clinics, you work in hospitals. You know that we have a problem here in Chicago with getting our teachers vaccinated, getting them back in school. I'm appealing to you for your help. We are trying to get 10,000 vaccinations strictly for Chicago public school teachers to get them back in their classrooms. I don't want to see a situation where 20 kids show up and the teacher's at home teaching them on Zoom. The teacher's not in the classroom, and the only thing that separates the teacher from being there is a vaccination. And so that has been very, very eye-opening. How are principals evaluated?
Principals are evaluated twice. They're evaluated by their network chiefs. Those are the people. So in CPS, we're divided into networks. And so there are anywhere from 20 to 40 schools in a network. And each network has a chief, sometimes a deputy chief. And that chief goes through a rubric. And I don't remember everything that's on the rubric, but there's a rubric of different competencies that a principal should have. And they're supposed to be evaluated on that rubric. Sometimes the chief will say, sit down with a principal and say, which one do you want to emphasize? Which one do you feel like you need to grow on? If you have a good chief and you pick some growth areas and then you turn in evidence of growth in those areas to that chief over the course of the year. It's not always done the way it needs to be done, but that's the general pattern. And then principals are also evaluated by their local school councils using a similar rubric.
You and I went to Chicago public schools. We feel that we turned out pretty good. Whenever someone wants to make a joke about bad education, the joke is always about CPS schools. We're the third largest school district in America, but yet we are often looked at as not a good system. Mm-hmm. What would you do if you had the chance to do four or five things to change the mindset and or the outlook? You took your local school when you were a principal from 25% to 75% reading capacity. How would you improve the entire district across the board?
I'd improve the district by improving the city. Right. And let me say that many of the outcomes that you see at schools are not the result of what schools do. Many of the outcomes you see in schools are the result of our politics and our economy. And let me give you an example. I was an assistant principal in the poorest neighborhood in the city, North Lawndale. All right. And I was a principal in the wealthiest neighborhood in the city, Lakeview. Now, my students in North Lawndale came to school on day one of kindergarten, leaps and bounds behind my students who came to school on day one of kindergarten at Blaine and Lakeview. Mm-hmm. Now, they ain't never seen a school, and yet they're behind. They've never seen a teacher, and yet there's this significant gap. Now, once they get to Johnson School in North Lawndale, they all grow. Our schools grow kids. But guess what's happening over in Lakeview? They're growing too. And so they start off with this gap like this. And they all grow together. Schools, they all grow in schools. Mm-hmm. And so, but the schools who serve these kids continue to get judged by the fact that these kids haven't caught up with these kids. Well, the only way, they're all growing, the only way for that to happen is for these to grow slower than these, or for these to grow faster. Right? That's an impossible ask. You're saying, like if you want the student achievement to even out, you have to start where it starts. And it doesn't start in the schools. It starts in our economy, where the parents at Blaine have an average income of $200,000 a year, and the parents over at Johnson have an average income of $5,000 per year. And then that changes drastically what those students from birth to 5 get to be exposed to, their intellectual and cognitive development that they show up with on grade 1. And so we look at the violence and the trauma that's suffered that impacts the intellectual and academic development, not just from the ages of 1 to 5, but even once they're still in school. Like, this differences in resources, this difference in what they have access to. And even in schools, kids who showed up to some of these selective enrollment schools, they don't just have a music class. They have 10 different types of music class, right? Where you can learn an instrument, where you can focus on vocal, in some of our schools, they don't even have music, let alone so they don't have access to a broad curriculum that stimulates and develops that intellectual capacity. But most of it, so this is basically, whether it's in school or out of school, it's about an equitable political system. It's about an equitable economic system that gives those kids access to the same things that promote intellectual growth outside of a school. Right now, we have a school system that punishes schools and blames schools for the failure of our politicians to get these students what they need in their neighborhood, because it's that failure that shows up when the student takes that test, not the school's failure. Because what we've shown is that Chicago schools grow kids better than any other school system in the state of Illinois. They've done a study, it was at University of Chicago, and it was repeated at the University of Illinois at Chicago, very similar studies, where they looked at kids in certain racial groups and economic levels and looked at their performance across the state and compared them to similar racial groups and similar we came out better than the average in every single one in terms of when you compare apples to apples. Students at similar income levels, the ones in Chicago at that income level, were always better than students at similar income levels across the state. So our schools are doing what they're supposed to do. Our politicians, our aldermen, our mayor, our state representatives, our congressmen, our business community, they're not doing what they need to do, and they need to stop taking the results of their failure and pinning them on schools. They need to be held accountable. I think every kid who shows up in kindergarten should be given a test.
I believe that wholeheartedly.
And as soon as they get the results of those tests, the school shouldn't get a grade. The kids, it's the first day of kindergarten. You need to give the alderman a grade. You need to give the mayor a grade. You need to give the state rep a grade. You need to give the senator a grade. You need to give the Chamber of Commerce a grade based on how that student performs and how different that performance is from the kid on the other side of the city in the more well-off school. That's who should be graded. And then we might start getting the kind of city policies, the kind of economic policies, political policies, not just education policies, that will ensure when those kids show up on day 1 of kindergarten, that gap between them and their friends across town is not there.
Let me tell you that I agree with everything you said, 99%. I'm going to tell you what I think the 1% is. I think that we should give all students a test when they come in the kindergarten so that we know baseline where they start. Mm-hmm. What that's actually called is that the children who are in affluent areas, they come to school with 1,000 hours of literacy training. They have 1,000 hours. The kids who come in from poor schools, they have about 25 hours. A lot of it has to do with the 1% that I won't give you is you left out the word home. And I want to say to everybody who's watching, those of us in that village where Taquiana and Bay Boy comes from, we got a job too. We got to get them ready for kindergarten too. Rather than buying these cute little Air Jordan baby shoes for kids, we need to start buying these babies some flashcards and asking them about the letter A and the letter B and the letter C. We have to get our nephews, our nieces, our grandkids, we have to help get them ready for kindergarten too. I'm 100% with you now on the system that's letting kids down. But these kids all come from a home. They know how to cuss. They know how to dance. They know how to do all this stuff that's happening in our homes. We got to make sure that when they go to kindergarten or preschool, that we are asking them questions and we're getting them ready. Every auntie, every uncle, every cousin, we have a responsibility of getting our children ready for kindergarten, because on the North Shore, they're going to have them 1,000 hours of literacy training. From our community, they don't have them. And we have to start with a better preschool system for our children. So that's what we have to work together on.
Yeah, I left out the word home, but I didn't leave out the concept home, because the concept of home is embedded in the idea of what our elect. So where are the folks at home going to get the resources they need to become what they need to become for their children? So the concept of home, and when I say the politicians need to act differently, it means that they have to start funding programs to get the kind of training to new mothers and new fathers that they need in order to become the parents that they need to be.
Right.
And so it's one thing to say it's the parents are, the parents need to be held responsible or accountable. It's another thing to say, what must we do what must I do as an alderman? What must I do as a state rep? What must I do as the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce to get the things in these parents' hands that need to get the training to them, the resources, the libraries, the in-home libraries that need to be there in order for them to fulfill the just responsibility that you said that they have. And so you're right. I didn't say the word home, but when I say that they need to be held accountable, I mean they need to be held accountable for facilitating and making happen exactly what you said needs to happen in the home.
Let me ask you this. High schools were left out of the plan. Therefore, high schools are not scheduled to open. I noticed that these carjackings that we're having are mostly teenagers, and these are teenagers who probably should be in a high school. So first of all, why were high schools left out, and why aren't we trying to open up high schools?
So it's I can't say why in terms of getting the district's head, but I can tell you what's the conversation out there has been, and much of it has been around the impossibility of doing the pod model with a high school schedule.
What's a pod model?
Where you take half the high school or half the school and put them in a group, and that group comes to school 2 days per week.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another group, Pod B, they come to school 2 days a week. So Pod A comes to school Monday and Tuesday. Pod B, then there's Wednesdays a break to clean everything up. Pod B comes to school on Thursday and Friday. So the medical experts have decided that this is the best way to isolate kids and keep them away from each other, so that if there's an outbreak, at least it could be retained in one pod and the other pod won't be affected. And so what principals have told me is that model is impossible in a high school, at least what most principals have said to me. And it's my understanding that that is at least a huge impediment to getting high schools up and running. With that said, there's certainly I would imagine some things that the district could do on a smaller scale in high schools, but you'd have to talk to a high school because they know the details
right.
of the scheduling issues. But I have heard high school principals. In fact, I know high school principals who have brought smaller groups of kids into their schools, who they knew were not going to succeed in remote learning, and just brought them in to do something with them, even though remote learning is technically not up and running in high schools. And so I would imagine that kind of thing could be done around the district with principals who feel like they're ready to do it.
Did you say remote learning is not up and going in high schools?
If I did, I made a mistake.
Okay, yeah, right. Because that was my next question. How is remote or virtual learning going in high schools? How is it going across the board?
The biggest complaint that I've heard is that there's too much screen time, that the school day, that the state has a certain requirement, and CPS is surpassing that requirement by several hours, and that there needs to be more time for what they call asynchronous learning, kids doing projects and readings outside of the screen, and that the need to be in front of that screen for, 5-6 hours a day is driving a lot of students from engaging in remote learning to the degree that, with the degree and consistency that they otherwise would if it were not as long a day for them. That's what I've been hearing the most about remote learning in high schools.
What's happening with the 14-year-olds that I talked about who are doing the carjacking? These 14-year-olds should be in our school system. Do you think that these are kids who, after they get through with their virtual learning, they're going out and carjacking people at night? Do you think these are kids who have left the system?
I don't know what they are. What I can say is that, I went to Dunbar, and Dunbar created a path for me and other people like me. We're a vocational school. We learn shops and trades, and I know that the school district has been tearing programs like that apart. My younger brother he got into some stuff when he was younger, but then he came to Dunbar and he found a path there, and he eventually became a city champion wrestler and got a scholarship to Howard University. He also became a principal. But he and I both could have been on that path, right? But another path was created for us. And so school is certainly a path, but even when schools are open, there's so much test-driven, flat instruction that kids cannot connect with that they don't see their path. People talk about learning loss from remote learning. There was learning loss when school was in session. When you decide that you're going to focus most of your attention on 2 tests in 2 subject areas, and to the detriment of everything else in the curriculum, right, then that means there's going to be learning loss in those other subjects because you've decided this is what we're going to be focusing on. Like, I don't see any other better evidence for the learning loss across Chicago and America, period, in terms of this focus on this sort of test-focused instruction than the insurrection that just happened. The fact that it shows that American people don't even have a system, an internal system, to be able to tell truth from fiction, right? Like, so what this gives us an opportunity to evaluate, not just let's get these kids back into schools, but what are we bringing them back into? And let's make sure that there's a path for everybody. So whether or not those young men, like whether school, just being in school would have been a path that kept them off of this, I don't know. But I know that carjackings were still happening when school was in session. I know there was a plague of carjackings a couple of years ago when school was still in session.
Well, listen, let me say this, because we're about to run out of time. That hour really goes by fast. I would love to look at your upbringing one day. You became a principal. Your brother became a principal. I know that there's something that happened in your home, your neighborhood, somewhere that kept you guys on track. If people want to contact you, if people want to ask you further questions, how do they reach you? Give our members, viewers, an opportunity to reach out to you. How do they do that?
Sure.
Put that mic up to your mouth.
My email, thanks, I keep forgetting that. My email address is my first and last name at gmail.com, Troy Laraviere, TroyLaraviere at gmail.com. On Twitter, I'm at Troy Laraviere. So just basically any platform, Facebook, Twitter, email, you throw Troy Laraviere in there and you'll find me.
Salem, our time is up. I love you. Good night. God bless you. Those of you who are still watching on Facebook, I thank God for you. I know that you're still there on all of our platforms. I've been watching the numbers. They've been climbing as the night has gone on. This has been an interesting conversation. Our kids are scheduled to go back to school tomorrow, everybody except for our high school. And as you can see from Troy, who is in charge of our principals think that some of the plans are not good, And the only thing we can do at this point is to hope, trust, and pray. Like I said to all of you earlier, that if there's anybody with an opposing side and you want to come on next week or week after next and talk about your side of it, we'll be glad to have you as a part of as this conversation. Troy, thank you so much for coming. I am sure that tomorrow you'll get one or two people who they were tuned in, they saw you, they'll be encouraging you or they'll be throwing stones at you, one or the other. But thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Reverend. I appreciate it so much.
Let's have a word of prayer. Our Father and our God, we thank you for your loving kindness and your great mercy. We put our school system in your hand. Everybody says it's all about the children, and we do put the children in your hand so that they too can have a chance to grow, to learn, to be principals and to be teachers, to be mayors and governors and state representatives, so that they can learn to make this world a better place. Thank you for Troy. Thank you for all of the principals who he represents. I pray now that you would give them great courage and boldness and wisdom to lead our children. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, Troy. Elbow bump.
Thank you.
All right.